James is going to talk with you about the project itself, what it is, what it's attempting to do. But James, the first thing I want you to talk about is where the project came from. It didn't spring fully formed from the head of Zeus in November 2016. The idea of doing this project that investigates what the Iliad is and how it came to be the way it is something that has been with you for a very long time.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad to clarify that I'm not Athena. It didn't spring from that head. Yes, my engagement with Homer and the nature of his poetry, the structure of it, actually started when I did a master's degree under the supervision of Neil Stanford at the University of Dublin. His name might be known to some of you as the author of a book called the Ulysses Theme, which looked at the use and reuse of the story of Odysseus down the centuries, culminating, of course, in a very Dublin figure, Mr. Joyce. Not that he wrote it in Dublin, but nevertheless it gave us a local focus. One particular thing that I just want to take from that time, because it's germane to what has happened as a result of Jeff's stimulus, offering the challenge as well as the invitation to do something at the first Humanities 21 Homer conference, was that, in case we just wind back just one moment, I think it is still true that everything we know about Homer, and you can say we don't know very much about Homer at all, but we do know a great deal about how he wrote, how he composed, the sort of performer poet that he was, because of the extraordinary anthropological research, artistic research of Melbourne Parry, an American scholar in Bosnia, among the Bosnian oral poets. I still find it amazing that A, he learnt the language, that B, he had the thought going over there, C, he had the tenacity just to listen and listen and listen and record, and listen so respectfully. And this wasn't sort of Western imperialism plucking something about Homer. And what he discovered was that the structures of Bosnian oral poetry were actually exactly the same in certain key structural elements as was with Homer. And since he could then observe them, right, as oral poets, say, this is how it worked. Now, to give the most obvious one, and I think this relates a little bit to what I'm going to say later on, this is probably very well known to everybody here, but you'll excuse me if I repeat sometimes things that I know, that Homer, or that any oral poet, certainly the Bosnian poet, is not reciting something that he has received. The poem does not remain constant down the centuries or even through his life. It is different every time he does it. He is improvising. Now, he's improvising with a strong structure, but the analogy would be much closer to a jazz performer than to somebody, say, performing Beethoven, right? Immense things flow from him. But one that relates particularly to this project that came to interest me very much was that the question of how long could an oral poet perform? Therefore, how long would the performances last? So he did some work on that. Worked out. It was very interestingly, it was about an hour and a half, which is about the length of films when films were a reasonable length. That's stopped recently, but when I was in Dublin, films were that long. So I did a bit of arithmetic on syllabic counts, right? How many syllables that was in the Bosnian poetry, as against how many syllables was in Homer. And what I discovered was that if you take an hour and a half, what can be done in an hour and a half, that the average length of Homer's books, as we now unfortunately call them, episodes, singings, is the same, would mean it would last an hour and a half. Now, there's some problems there because some of the books are much longer than others. Kind of just skip over that. I then started thinking, and I think it's a really good thing to share and think about. If you think of each of the, well, I can't get one call them, of course, because that's what we all call them, is a performance. So they start to become much more legible. They start to become a great deal more fun. Because I think we would all acknowledge, or maybe there are some superhuman people here from whom it would be otherwise, that for many people, reading the Iliad can at times, anyway, be hard work, be repellent, can be very, so people often have a mixture of glimpsing enough of its splendour to want to read it, or of it, knowing its reputation, and being a bit embarrassed because we're finding it so difficult. And certainly one of the things that one must never do with Iliad or the Odyssey, but especially the Iliad, is just to read it through as if it was a novel. It'll kill you. But that's because you're reading against the structure of it. Try just reading an episode. I prefer to call them episodes. Can I call them episodes? And we know what I'm talking about. Read an episode, savour it, put the book down. Maybe leave it for a couple of days or a week, and then come back to read the next one. And you're going to start finding yourself attuned with the rhythm. Okay, so that was my attempt to retrieve some scholarly respectability. This occasion, after all, the University of Melbourne, shouldn't I be seeking that? But that scholarly thing became, about the time when Jeff approached me, I was concentrating on solo performance in my own work. And so what I said to Jeff was, what I'd like to do, I've got this theory, worked very well in teaching. When I was teaching in America, it's worked very well in subsequent thinking and writing, but I've never tried it out actually in performance. What to say, I showed that at work in books 1 and 2. That was all we did. That was enough. I might say, I thought that was going to be it. I thought, you know, I'd satisfied Jeff, get on with other things. That turned out to be a different story. But anyway, so then I think two things were critical in decisions made that have since, I think, proved very fruitful. One of them, which I'm sorry I can't share with you tonight, but he's up in Brisbane performing and come from away. I thought, no, I want to do this with a musician. And I thought the best form of music for this is percussion, because percussion is right at the cutting edge of contemporary music structures, and yet very accessible, probably one of the more accessible forms of contemporary music, and very theatrical. I have to say, I'm very lucky indeed with the person that I got. What happened there was that I only thought, well, I have to have this at the beginning and the end, right? Or to mark the gap between the books. But actually, the more I worked with Matthew Horsley, the more we actually integrated our work and worked together. And that means, of course, that whatever else we know about Homer, we know that he worked with the lyre, right? He plucked. In some way that we don't know, there was an interplay between the rhythm of the lyre and the interplay of the tactile, the kick sound with the rhythm of the singing, whatever singing meant, right? He was, after all, this order, a divine singer. So that, I think, hasn't just made it nice. I think it actually goes back, it takes you to the roots of the performative nature of the text, performative rather than reciting. Homer was to go through later on, when oral poetry finished, but his poems would continue in ancient Athens, the music dropped away. They just recited them. Nothing like as exciting, I always think, but anyway, the Athenians liked it, so who might have complained? We'll leave that story aside for a moment. Now, the second thing that I found, and this will bring us to one of the things you have been offered as a prospect that I hope we can deal with tonight, about vision and revision of myths, right? Recycling of myths, was that I found it best to put Homer's words into the future tense to bring Homer back, to imagine Homer preparing himself for that evening's performance, as he sure as hell would have done. Whether you're a reciting performer or an improvising performer, you go into a deep place before you perform. You think what is there, but that happens to any of us, even if we're doing a text, no. But think of Homer as an improviser, right? He's going to be super aware of his big structures, right? So, and hence the title of the piece, Homer prepares. Homer thinks, Homer envisages, and then of course as we go on slowly, one enacts certain parts. We've never done, and I would never try to do a whole book, every single word. Lots of people do. Well, they don't actually. They would make major cuts out of it. But they set out to do that. I'm actually interested in enlivening the actual sense of each of those performances, which are extraordinarily different from each other. Right? Just think of the difference between book 1 and book 2, book 3 and book 4. I mean, one can go right through and split that. They are amazing, that the tonal changes. I'm working with them in 13 to 16. That's from the duer fight after Hector's come over the wall, unyielding fight where nothing happens between the Greeks and the Trojans, and a great deal happens. It's very unpleasant, but no exciting outcome. What's the next book? The Tale of Destruction of Zeus by Hero. What's the next book? Amazing and much undersung. Book 15. I love the undersung books of Homer. Obviously, they're much more exciting than they're made out to be, which is like really the best account of a mass of two armies fighting over the last line of the city wall. Okay, it's not the city wall, it's the line of the ships, but it's the nature of the scene, right? So, by taking him into the compositional, trying to enter his compositional process as he prepares to sing, I try, right? I try to give just a sense of what that performance would have been, which in turn, I suppose, means that I'm hoping as an outcome of this, people can feel refreshed, liberated to go back and read the books for themselves with more ease and more delight, and say, hey, you missed that bit out. Which would be great. I love people to say, you missed that bit out, because it's always very painful to do it, but I'm just trying to make the thing entertaining as a performance. But coming back to, what's the subtitle? Myth and its...
Reinterpreting myths for modern audiences.
Thank you. Reinterpreting myths for modern audiences. That what I would say is we tend to think of Greek myths as having a certain solid state, right? That they were there, they took a finite form. The fact is that Greek mythology was in a continual state of dynamic retelling. So it was never in a fixed form, which is one of the reasons why so many books on Greek mythology are boring and misleading. This is the form. In fact, all that you're getting is this is the philosophical stuff. Homer, Euripides. If I could just give one example I always find highly entertaining about the polymorphic form of Greek myth. Apparently, later on in Hellenistic times, you know, when the classics are beginning to look like we think of classics, a very important sort of thing that Tony Abbott approves of as part of the Western Judeo-Christian tradition, important that people do them. Well, that process started in the Hellenistic times. And so tourism starts. So where do people go? They go to Thebes. So there's the seven steps, seven steps, da-di-da-di-da-di-da, and so on. Naturally. All right, what was one of the famous tourist attractions of Thebes? It was the Surba Antigones. What does that mean? The groove of Antigone. And what was it? It was a long furrow in the ground. And how was that furrow made? It was made as Antigone dragged the body of Polynices to where she was going to bury him. Very nice. I'd have paid money to see that too if I was a tourist in Thebes. But what's the strange thing? That bears no relationship to the myth as we encounter it in Sophocles. The whole point about Sophocles is that body is not removed. The whole point is that it lies in that strange, creepy way, dead among the living, flat on the plain, and the act of burying by Antigone is not dragging them off, it's sprinkling dust over here. Now, we could talk at some length about why Sophocles would want to do it that way, but that's all I want to do is to use that as an example of how the myth is being reinterpreted, retold, continually, and that Homer was certainly doing this. To take just another example from Homer, one of the very interesting questions is built into the tradition is, how does Hector die? Right? He's a key figure in mythology, and I think you'll agree with me, a terribly interesting figure. He is a different figure in each of the episodes, which very much confirms, I think, what I'm suggesting we see as the structure of it. But what is the nature of the great final conflict? Now, if you look, well, actually, Homer keeps doing different versions of this. They usually involve Ajax, and they usually involve a boulder. So to give you one example, in book 15, episode 15, Singing 15, the end of 14, Zeus has fallen asleep under the influence of the extremely pleasant experience with Hera. So the whole structure of power on the plane changes. Hector is no longer a protected species. Ajax picks up a rock, comes in, strikes him just over the top of the room, spins him round like a top. He falls like a tree falls with a stench of sulphur in the air. His companions carry him from the field with a shelter of shields over them, lay him down beside the river, always such an important thing of life and death, Iliad, life and death of the city. Throw water over him, he revives, stands on his knee and vomits a great clot of black blood and falls back down again. I put it to you, that's a version of the death, right? That's one of the ways in which death is in effect happens. Another way would be a particularly epic duel with Achilles, if we get to it. We don't. Iliad, but we do get to Ajax in book 53. In book, no, sorry. Anyway, we did Ajax. However, what could prepare us for the fact that when the final confrontation with Achilles actually comes, it's one of the great, best-known scandals of the ancient world. He turns round, Achilles after him. I would absolutely, in a world in which, of course, we don't know anything, but which we always get this evidence from within the poem, it is both the absolutely wrong thing to happen and the absolutely right thing to happen. The only thing that can happen because he's a creative. So, yeah, here we go.